dirty energy, meaning is there a lot of byproducts that producing that energy actually causes a lot more stress. And since methylene blue is a clean source of this type of energy, I thought that this could be actually useful for me in the morning when I do not have enough cognitive power when I wake up in a different time zone.
One of the things about methylene blue that people should know is the difference between pharmaceutical grade and everything else. Dr. Schur, can you run us through why I shouldn't be injecting myself or taking fish tank cleaner?
Yeah, this is another article that came out about 6 months into the pandemic. It was a great clickbait headline. It says, biohackers reversing their age drinking fish tank cleaner.
Do you want to kick this one off, Scott?
Well, the funny thing is that Boomer is like straight-faced, right? Doesn't smile that much when you talk to him on the phone.
I don't know. That's just to you. I do. I smile plenty to everybody else.
But the Bloomy Party, when we released Just Blue, it was like a different Boomer.
The name is DJ Boomer. Yes. But some things, there's this sort of trite saying in Silicon Valley, if you're not embarrassed about something you did a couple of years ago, you're clearly not iterating enough. This would be one of those moments. Take us through the Bloomy Party, Dr. Scott, because now you got everybody intrigued. What happened?
So this is maybe 4 months into the pandemic. This is June of 2020.
At this point, both Ted and I had not been on a plane for a couple of months. And so maybe that's why I was a completely different person.
It was quite the event, virtual event. I mean, everybody was trying to do them at the time because nobody could get together. But it was interesting because Ted and I think, Boomer, you were getting this feedback as well. We kept getting asked by people those several months ahead of time, can you please come out with something that's purely methylene blue? Like we love nicotine and caffeine, but we want a higher strength methylene blue. And there was a lot of different reasons for this, some pandemic related, I believe.
And some just frankly, people don't. Caffeine's one of those things that's quite binary. They love it or they hate it.
Yeah, there were two groups actually. Ones that didn't like the other ingredients of blue canteen. And for me, there was direct emails from users of our blue canteen who said, well, we read through your ingredients and what intrigued us was methylene blue. And because we want to help our parents with cognitive decline. And they said, we saw in the studies that methylene blue is actually being studied for cognitive decline. And true enough, when I took a look, I wasn't looking at this at all. And this was, Just Blue is really a great story for a product because this was actually a request from the users themselves, right? And so I took a look at the studies, and at the time, the study that was being done in NIH was 8 milligrams of methylene blue for Parkinson's and 16 milligrams for Alzheimer's. And that became my basis for formulating the troche, really, for cognitive decline. It's not for any specific disease that I formulated it for, but how much energy the brain needed to function. Because ultimately, whatever disease you have, it's a failure to generate enough energy for the cell to actually defend itself and fight stress. Right. And that's why I am very focused on the energy production rates, and at what cost that energy is actually being produced for you. Is it dirty energy, meaning is there a lot of byproducts that producing that energy actually causes a lot more stress? And since methylene blue is a clean source of this type of energy, I thought that this could be actually useful for me in the morning when I do not have enough cognitive power when I wake up in a different time zone. That's a kind of experience that I've had, like when using actually just pure methylene blue. It gives you the feeling of brightness. It's like you're awake, but you're not caffeine awake. You're just that brightness or lifting of the brain fog that's there. The genesis of Just Blue, and the reason why they were laughing at the beginning of this on the Bloomy Party, as I was being asked, what would be our byline for this? And I said, Bloomy. And the sticker became, I heart blue jobs. And then
Some things I'm glad
The
evolved.
hat says Bloomy, but that was fun at that time. It was the COVID era and there was nothing else to do. So,
I mean, we'll have vintage releases at some point.
We couldn't even get it made at the manufacturer. We actually had to do it all by hand. We couldn't get the packaging, if you remember. So we actually initially would send out 4 Just Blue with a card in the mail when we first started fulfilling it in June of 2020.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was crazy, but there was such a huge request for it. And that's kind of how the whole Blue Me party began.
the part that actually it was interesting, Ben Greenfield talked about us. He said, "Oh, they have ghetto packaging," and that stuck to me because we were literally, because we couldn't get any packaging right at the time, we were putting them in dime bags. So it's like it was really something else. But hey, it flew off the shelves, and I'm actually quite pleased at that.
So, I mean, it was, if I recall, and again, this is similar to the the webinar party that we had. One of those things that makes you, in hindsight, wonder, like, okay, what were we thinking? But it was Troche dime bags stapled to a card that explained what you were getting. And again, at this point, nothing was shipping from China. Nothing was available to be able to package this in. So we made it work, and a lot of people seem to really like it. In fact, now it's our best-selling product.
Just to clarify though, Boomer, the turkeys are made here in the United States under the supervision of the compounding pharmacist, but the packaging is actually made in China.
Yeah, to be fair, everything is made in the United States under the supervision of compounding pharmacists. Everything is precision dose. You know exactly what you're getting. Everything is physician formulated. You're looking at a couple of them here, and everything is pharmaceutical grade, including that methylene blue. Now, that kind of segues. Oh, look how I did that. Wow. That segues into methylene blue. One of the things about methylene blue that people should know is the difference between pharmaceutical grade and everything else. Dr. Schur, can you run us through why I shouldn't be injecting myself or taking fish tank cleaner?
Yeah, this is another article that came out about 6 months into the pandemic. It was a great clickbait headline, says biohackers reversing their age drinking fish tank cleaner.
Shout out New York Post.
Yes, and it was the biohacker babes, Lauren and Renee. Thank you very much. I think you were featured along with Ben Greenfield as well in this article. And well, methylene blue has a storied history. It's been around for over 100 years. And yes, indeed, it can be found in fish tank cleaner, but it actually doesn't clean the tank. It actually helps treat the fish with fungal bacterial infections. Now, we can get into that later if you want, but the idea here is that fish tank cleaner is not something that anybody should be drinking. Fish tank cleaner is highly contaminated with multiple different things, including heavy metals like nickel, cadmium, mercury, lead, arsenic, those kinds of things. So we would prefer you would go with a product, a methylene blue product that's highly tested. Unfortunately, this is very difficult to find in this world even now. Even something that's called USP, which is the highest grade supposedly, can be contaminated with these things. I could tell Boomer probably doesn't want to talk about how much product and how much stuff we've thrown out and the monetary amounts of this stuff over the years, because we've always had to find the best stuff. It's not easy to do. It's very difficult to do.
And we have to test it, right? Because all of those things you listed, whether it's arsenic, cadmium, nickel, mercury, if you want like a top 10 ways to fuck up your Krebs cycle, I think that's probably it. I mean, you guys tell me.
It's up there.
But
cyanide.
You hinted at something there that we pride ourselves on, which is that beyond USP, because we test everything with HPLC testing, and we make that available to all of our customers too.
The standard that we have actually for the purity of our methylene blue is the same as the standard that you would see in an ampule that you would see in the ER, right? For that you break and you constitute for the treatment of carboxyhemoglobin poisoning, right? So that's a standard that is being approximated by the purity of our methylene blue. We're very strict about that. Even if this is an oral form, we're using an IV form as a standard for our purity.
Okay, so methylene blue created in, I believe, the 1860s by BASF. and later became the first drug approved by the FDA, largely for malaria. And then, it had this time when it was considered for a magic bullet list. It was used for psychiatry to make sure that people are able or are taking their drugs. And then it gets, I want to talk a little bit about how it became used for mitochondrial health and how we came to know of its effects on mitochondrial health. And so maybe one of you guys can jump in right there and take us up to modern times.
Well, before the mitochondrial health, I just like have a little story. I had a patient from Marseille, right? And he said, well, Dad, when we were growing up, we used to have this, whenever we'd have a sore throat or something, there was this candy that was colored blue. And then you took it, your tongue went blue, and then your pee went blue. He said, and, the next day, you had no more sore throat. And my patient then was 76 years old. He said it was a young boy in Marseille. And they said, well, that was methylene blue, right? That was actually showcasing the anti-infective properties of methylene blue. The studies on the mitochondrial effects of methylene blue came much later. And Dr. Scott can actually tell us about the history of that.
Yeah. And just another point on one thing you mentioned too, Burma, the magic bullet thing. I think this is interesting for those that are in, like history. Like the idea was that methylene blue, even at very, very high doses, would kill pathogens in human bodies without harming human cells. And that's why it was called a magic bullet, is that it had this magical capacity of killing things that weren't supposed to be there, but at the same time, not kill your human cells. And that's why it was used as like the only antimicrobial available, really one of the very few up until the 1950s when those came on board. But you had World War II pilots that had to take it during the Pacific Theater as prophylaxis. They had stories and songs about urinating blue because that's always fun. But most of us, like myself and Dr. Ted, learned about methylene blue in the lab because it's a stain that's used in the lab, in chemistry lab. And where does it stain in your cells? It actually stains or concentrates, is another way to say stain, in your mitochondria. So the mitochondrial work that's been done with methylene blue has only been done in the last 20 to 30 years, really. And we now know from lots of different studies that it has this capacity to both enhance the electron transport chain in many very different ways. It can compensate for areas of the electron transport chain, which is the part of the mitochondria that makes your energy. It can compensate for any blockages that you might have there. And it does that in amazing different ways, depending on what's going on, even things like cyanide poisoning, for example, which blocks one of your complexes called complex 4. So if you're going to be around cyanide, it's always good to have some methylene blue around. I don't think many of us, unless you're going to Russia anytime soon, maybe.
Or drinking too much cyanocobalamin.
Oh.
Not easy to do, but certainly possible, right? Right. So anyway, so you have this capacity for methylene blue to enhance the mitochondrial function, making more energy. But at the same time, when the mitochondria make energy, you also make what are called products of energy metabolism. The biggest ones everybody knows about are carbon dioxide, of course, water. You make energy, which is ATP, the currency itself. You make these small additional things called reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress or free radicals. Typically, that's what our mitochondria are supposed to do. We're supposed to balance that out with producing antioxidants to help neutralize those. But as we get older, if we have chronic complex medical illness, if we're inflamed, if we're not in the same time zone for more than 2 weeks, like Dr. Ted, we get lots of inflammation. And so the methylene blue can come in there and help neutralize that oxidative stress. And then as a result, act just like an antioxidant. So energy and resilience is what I typically tell my patients. That's what you get when you take methylene blue at these doses.
All right. So I want to just discuss use cases here because I take Just Blue every single day. I know at least one of you do as well. What would be an instance? Let's talk, specific use cases of methylene blue, and then we'll get into the special case of where somebody might want to take it every day.
Also going to mention here too, though, is that what was very different about Dr. Ted's decision to go with the 16 milligrams of Just Blue is that much of the research out there and many of the studies on more of acute reasons to use methylene blue have been around the 1 milligram per kilogram dose. And that's a much higher dose. We decided to go with this much lower dose because of the research that you mentioned, Ted, in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And when we started using it this low dose, I wasn't entirely sure what the situation was going to be in people that had multiple things going on. But I mean, it was very, very soon when we first started using it, where we started getting reports of people that had been having significant issues for long periods of time, feeling like their brains were back on in several days, or their pain was better in just a few days of taking this methylene blue. And then I remember one story very early on when we first released it. It was a lady that had given it to her grandmother that had grown up in Mexico and was in her mid 80s and started telling stories about her life as a child in Mexico that her granddaughter had never heard before. And like that story is repeated on multiple different occasions throughout the years since that time.
I actually want to touch, because you reminded me in something you said there, Scott, about the deliberate decision to keep a lower dose methylene blue.
Yeah.
And what that meant. Let's talk about potential risks of going higher, for example, and specifically about the gut biome.
Before that, I just want to jump in here and say that I think what surprised me the most was that lower dose methylene blue actually worked for things other than cognitive decline. And for me, it was a fortuitous decision that I made. I was looking at some other dose for some other indication like lifting brain fog. And then here we are actually affecting other areas in beneficial ways. And that was really a surprise, which I really loved.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it came down to is that we just had to think about where most of the mitochondria in the body were. We have tons of them in our brain, in our heart, in our liver, in our genital organs, and our skeletal muscle, right? So where we started seeing a lot of the benefits was in those particular areas. And I think what was happening here was, because it's a low dose, the challenge with higher doses, which is a good segue here, Boomer, is that the challenge as you get to a higher and higher dose of methylene blue, you start creating more stress on the system. And it might be a mild amount of stress when you start going up a little bit higher, but as you go higher and higher, that stress goes up. And so they have some people that are just not able to tolerate higher doses because they don't have the capacity to be able to do what's required to compensate for higher doses of methylene blue. And what I mean by that is that at higher doses, around 50 milligrams and above, you're going to start producing something called hydrogen peroxide. And hydrogen peroxide is known as it's a cleaner, right? Everybody knows about that, but our body makes it to fight infection. And it does this in very, very efficient ways. And this is one of the reasons why at the higher doses like this, methylene blue has shown no resistance patterns when it comes to treating infection. Like almost every other antibiotic or antifungal out there will always have resistance patterns over time because it makes this hydrogen peroxide, but that also creates stress on the system. If you have more hydrogen peroxide around, that means that your body has to produce more of its natural antioxidants like glutathione, for example. If you're already stressed and you're not able to do that because you don't have enough already in capacity, then you may get significant symptoms as a result of that. So the higher doses create more hydrogen peroxide, and that's, again, can be great as an anti-infective. It can be great as an immediate anti-inflammatory in some ways, but it may not be tolerable by a lot of people. And then you also mentioned a couple other things that we do worry about as you get to the higher doses. You do think about its effect on gut biofilms. Now, if you have a gut biofilm that you don't want, we have colleagues that are in the world of Bartonella and Lyme and things like that that use higher doses of methylene blue, especially for Bartonella, because it can break up biofilms. And I've seen reports also in various communities that are using higher doses of methylene blue for interstitial cystitis, for example, as well, which is a pretty painful condition of the bladder itself. But the key, by keeping it low, we're keeping it as a mitochondrial optimizer without creating a huge amount of stress on the system, which is because so many of us in the United States and the world, 95% of the US population has some element of mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah, in fact, it's going to be the subject of another podcast, but what Dr. Scott just said here was also the inspiration for creating a practitioner-only line with 50 milligrams of methylene blue per troche, but it's available only for practitioners because they know how to handle their clients or their patients using this higher doses methylene blue.
So we've covered spatial, non-spatial memory, some of the studies that have been done on methylene blue with neurodegenerative disease. We've talked about ATP production. We've talked about just sort of the gut biofilm issue with higher dose and methylene blue. Now, I want to discuss some of your favorite responses, case studies that you've seen come in as a result of this, because Just Blue, more than almost any one of our products, has quite a lot of people that are emailing customer service and saying like, hey, this is fantastic, or I have some purview over number of subscribers and it has more than most of our products. And so would love to hear from you guys some of the feedback that you've got either in your clinics with your clients, or perhaps some of the things that you've seen.
I'm really bad at this because it's part of my daily stack. So, I would, it's like I am so biased for it. I take one of my Just Blue troches in the morning. Where I use it really mostly, if I can convince my patients to actually take it in, 1/2 or 1/4 daily, or even a whole one like I do, is that I have patients who actually have tested positive for the Alzheimer's gene. And it's funny, I have like 3 sisters who have all tested. I'm monitoring all of them to see. And it's very interesting that the one who actually is taking Just Blue, has staved off cognitive decline, whereas the other sisters have already begun, despite the fact that I've been giving them all the other supplements that will be, useful for staving off Alzheimer's. So it's this is anecdotal. These are, I can't publish them. There are 3 sisters that are coming to my clinic, but that's where I actually see the power of methylene blue in at least maintaining your cognitive power, right? Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that that you have the gene. I'm not saying it's a preventive. I'm not saying it's anything, but you maintain your cognitive power for longer.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side of the spectrum, we have jet lag, for example, and I've had a lot of my patients over the years do very, very well with Just Blue, and we have a full protocol on our website that we've developed, because when you're on an airplane, you're at low oxygen levels, and what methylene blue can do, it actually compensates for that can act just like oxygen in your mitochondria to help you create and allow you to maintain your energy production. You're also under more stress because you're on an airplane and you get bad air there, and you're stressed because you've been waiting to get on the plane. So actually Trocom is really great for that too in combination, just side note. But Just Blue here can be very, very protective. And so it's an antimicrobial. It's going to prevent you from maybe some radiation exposure as well when you're going through things, and can be really great for jet lag. So I've seen a lot of those positive responses personally, and also in my clinic. And what also comes to mind is that I've had a lot of people reach out to me for various reasons on the hyperbaric side for many years, and it's not very easy to get to a chamber, as you can imagine. And so people coming in with a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction, where I think that they could potentially be really helped quickly if they try methylene blue. And I've been blown away when people with multiple different types of cognitive injuries, people that are post-viral infectious kinds of things where their mitochondria still aren't working well. I had a lady that she'd been suffering from mold for a long time. She got better. The mold was gone, but she still felt terrible. She took 3 days of Just Blue and she was back to work. And I've had a lot of these different stories by clinicians tell me that they've been using them in their patients, and these ladies that can't leave their house because of too much fatigue, all of a sudden they're cleaning their house. They don't care that their urine's blue. They can clean their house and actually do things and go to get a haircut. And so it's been really some inspiring stuff over the years.
They just have to clean a blue toilet, right?
Worse things.
So I've got 2, one personal and one I was just actually visiting the person's house earlier today. Personal story regarding travel, not necessarily jet lag, but sort of related. One of Dr. Ted's good one-liners is around fungus, and it's nothing loves travel more than fungus. And one of the things that I've noticed in myself and some of my clients as a health optimization practitioner is that taking Just Blue daily seems to contain or at least minimize that fungus. So check one for benefit there. The second one is an experience that I had we had somebody who's a veteran reach out to our customer service a couple of years ago, and he does buy quite a lot of our products. And so naturally I was curious to talk to him, and I had a conversation with him. Actually, was just at his house, and He's a veteran. He was deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, went through what sounds like a very terrifying experience there, which resulted in some level of PTSD, but also lost his kidney due to some toxic exposure there in Afghanistan. After he came back to the United States, he also got into a car accident where he fell down a 100-foot cliff and had his face rebuilt. He had a significant brain injury, and the two things that have worked very, very well in him repairing his memory and overall function have been, number one, Scott's favorite thing, or the thing that got him started, is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And then after that, he was looking to mimic the feeling he got with hyperbaric oxygen therapy and got it with Just Blue. And he takes, I think, upwards of 5 Just Blue a day, but it seems to keep him going in a very proactive and energetic manner.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, the brain is so hungry for oxygen and it needs so much of it. It takes 20% of our oxygen at any time. So our capacity there is very, very high. And then it's very difficult to heal those kinds of injuries because the brain has a hard time getting more blood flow, more oxygen to it. So, and that's why you have people like Francisco Gonzalez Lima, for example, who should be mentioned here as a researcher at University of Texas, Austin, who thinks of Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment related to Alzheimer's as a blood flow issue, more as an oxygen delivery issue. So if you can give something like Methylene Blue here that can compensate for that, you can see the benefits. And we're seeing that, real time in our store with emails to our customer service on a daily basis.
Just to think, you take a look at the distribution of mitochondria, those that are most highly active, like the brain, the liver, your heart, they are the ones that have a lot of mitochondria, but they have also the least energy reserve. Right? So they have to function all the time because they are all actually used all the time. So there's where you'll see the major effects of Methylene Blue will be in those organs with a high concentration of mitochondria, because those organs, especially like the brain and the liver and the heart, they have a very low energy reserve within that organ.
Yeah, I should also mention just on the endurance side too, because I've worked with a lot of athletes that are using Just Blue for endurance. And I think I have a couple of patients, one lady, she refuses to work out on her elliptical without taking Methylene Blue beforehand, because she can keep her heart rate up longer and keep it at a higher rate for longer if she has the Methylene Blue, the Just Blue on board. And so if you were taking a higher dose, like 50, that would not be a good idea in these cases. So that's why the beauty of this dose is it's so supportive. And that's what's been like the game changer here for people. And it's been great to see across the board.
Beautiful. All right. Anything further to say about Just Blue before we wrap up, guys?
Take one every day.
I do miss the Bloomy parties and the blue jobs and the dime bags sometimes, but it was a really crazy way to start a company during the pandemic and also try to create and launch a product without even having any packaging. So we've come a long way, and we appreciate everybody's support over the years, and it's been a fun ride.
I still have rolls of the original blue dime bags here in my drawer, just as a memento for times gone.
Vintage.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll roll it out vintage at a conference sometime. Anyway. All right. Well, thank you guys. And to all listening, have a wonderfully healthy day.